Okay. The recording is going now. So we got that going. All right, we've got this week, according to the calendar, you've got chapter 9, which actually went, I guess, last week and this week and the week before. Yeah. Well, actually, 9 was supposed to start this week. That's what it was. Okay. Trying to figure this thing out. And we've already gone through 9, and I went ahead and opened the test up for you. I don't know who's taken it, because I really have not gone out there looking at the Cisco site since we've been out. Because I didn't go into y'all's class, the 2451 classes at all. The 2601 class, the security class, I did go in there to activate something, but I had to fix something, and I've got to go back, when I get back to the office, I got to run to Dalton first for after class. I got to go in there, and I want to test something on that one. Anybody, are you in 2601? None of y'all are in 2601, right? Or are you? As I think, from what I was told last week, where we've hit the problem in there of the students, where you had to set up the 4 virtual machines in chapter 11. And then in 12, you're using some of them to work together. And some people with limited memory are having a problem on that, trying to run them. From what I could gather last week and the week before, of where I've talking to some different people and some things, if we can put those in VMware, it appears that will take less resources than VirtualBox does. So I had a couple of others tell me that, some higher up ones, and then I even had a 10-year-old that was wanting to play some games or stuff on some older versions of Windows and wanted from me a copy of XP, 7, and Vista. Still can't figure out what in the world he wanted Vista for, but he wanted Vista. And he was initially putting them on VirtualBox, and then he said, and then he had changed to VMware, and I said, why? And he said, VMware required less resources than VirtualBox and ran better for him. They ran better in VMware and didn't require the resources that the other did. And if that's true, and since that was his experience, and then I'd had some others tell me similar on it, if we can load those images in VMware, I'm going to suggest people might try that. But I wanted to try it, see if the images that Cisco gives us will actually load in VMware. I think they will, although they're really VirtualBox images, but I think you can put the images in the other one, but I'm not sure. So I've got to try that. And I never did get to that last week. Because I did do a little bit of school stuff, but not much. Because I was actually on annual leave all week except for the first 2 hours last week. Because I did go into Walker last Monday because I had a report I had to file and had to turn in my hours. And there was something else it seems like I had to do at school on Monday morning. So I went to school Monday morning, and then I was not on campus until today. All right. So we are supposed to be on chapter 9 this week, but we went through chapter 9 last week. And that we talked our way through the handshakes, if I remember right. Yeah, and we did the windowing because it's still on the board up here. And so I showed you how to do that and how the handshake occurs to start the conversation in TCP, and then when you do windowing there in TCP, of where it's making sure everything arrives. Now, remember, if UDP, it just sends it all of the packets, actually all of the segments, one right after another, because we are on transport layer, so you're talking segments at this point. Now, when you get into VPNs and such, a VPN can actually end up having you doing layer 2 and layer 3 stuff up there on layer 4. Okay? So that confuses on that one. And that we talked about the flow control there with that. And then we went through and mentioned on the UDP, and I mentioned on which ones you use for which thing. That UDP was the DHCP, because you've got your other backups figuring out what you got there. DNS, same thing. SNMP, which is your network management system, management part of it, and so you're just managing things, so that doesn't have to be confirmed everything. TFTP, which is trivial FTP, which I said really the only place I've seen use it is Cisco when they're directly connected to the device. Voice over IP and IPTV, because on voice over IP, the two talking on the call, if it goofs up on that stuff, they'll tell the other one to repeat stuff again. And then IPTV, it doesn't have to all absolutely get there for you to get the full benefit of watching the show on TV. And then the TCP, HTTP uses TCP. That one always surprises me, because I really think HTTP ought to be using UDP. FTP does use TCP, and that clearly comes across on our illustration. SMTP, which is your mail sending, uses TCP, and then Telnet uses TCP, which makes sense because you're making sure everything in a direct conversation. That there is chapter 9. Questions on 9. So from here on out, all we've got is 2 chapters left in the book. We've got 10 and we got 11. And actually, 11 is going to combine and put stuff together for you in terms of looking at a small network. And the 2 or 3 that are in here that are in the 2601 class, that some of that's going to be familiar definitely to them as they look at from the other class. But we're going to look at some security things in that one and such in terms of a small network and things that you would set up on it and setting your settings and such in there. So they're sort of put it all together in the last chapter of the book. Now, from here on out, schedule-wise, we've got class this week, next week, the following week. And as far as I know, I think we've got class every day on that. But that 3rd week, some reason I'm thinking there's a seminar I've been invited to that I'm considering. But I gotta look back in my email to remember on that. But I don't think I had signed up for it yet, but was looking at it and thinking about it. The following week, that Wednesday, let's go ahead and cancel class on that day. Okay? Because I'll be here that morning earlier on, and I'll be here at 10. But I'm going to leave somewhere soon after that, 10:30 or so. I've got a luncheon over at the Walker County Civic Center that day that the Kiwanis are recognizing 2 people as Distinguished Service Award winners, one of them being the sheriff from over here. And I'm taking pictures that day at that luncheon, and I'm attending both as a Kiwanian and on behalf of the school, because I'm sitting at the school's table that day. And the big part is I'm taking pictures there, so I've got to be there when it starts and everything. And I really need to be there a little bit early, so maybe I can get my lunch before we start the program, so that I'll have eaten all my lunch before I have to start jumping up and down taking pictures. So the other part is y'all have got to do your final cabling, and that we can do it on that Monday, and we may actually be able to go ahead and start on it that previous Wednesday. Okay? Now, if you have not done the midterm one, you have to do that before you can do the final cabling on a separate day.
Do you think the day that you plan on doing the final, the cabling or whatever, you can do an announcement with the...
Can I do what?
Can you do like an announcement or something on the whiteboard so we have to make sure to show up?
So you know what?
So like to make sure that we're here.
Oh.
For example, Tavian has work, so he knows what it, like, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, okay.
Help him to know what day you plan on doing it, so he can make sure that.
We'll definitely do on that Monday, and then if you don't get finished, y'all can come back in on another day, and work on it. And like I say, on that Wednesday, if you showed up early, it's just I've got to leave somewhere around 10:30 that morning, but I'll be here from 8:30 till 10:30 or so. Because I need to be back over there at the Civic Center somewhere 11 o'clock or so. And then we can work later that day too on Monday on it. But y'all have already done it at this point, so you should be able to get it done during that time period. Okay? And for that matter, it can be done up through the next Monday, because that's actually final exam day on May the 6th, okay? Because finals are on May 6th and 7th, that Monday and Tuesday. And so I'll be here that Monday also, and we can do it that Monday. But I want them all finished definitely by that Monday, okay? Which is when your online final you've got to have completed by also that Monday, which will be open from Saturday through Monday. Does that make sense? The Chapter 11 test will close that Friday, May the 3rd. Okay? Because that's actually the last day of classes, and then finals are Monday and Tuesday. And then I've got to get grades in that week, probably by Thursday, maybe Friday, probably Friday morning. Since we got finals on Monday and Tuesday, I may have to go to Rome Tuesday night for graduation, because that's when graduation is on Tuesday night, I believe. Maybe wrong. Graduation may be Thursday night. Graduation's either Tuesday or Thursday night that week. And then the other one is I've got advisory committee online in the evening, probably at 7 o'clock, and we're going to do it WebEx the other evening. So if graduation's Tuesday night, I'll have that on Thursday night, or vice versa. So it's not like I'll have a lot of time in there, and I've got to get all the grading obviously finished before then. And I'm obviously behind on grading. Not as much behind in this class, although I think I'm behind a little bit. And I want to work on that today too, but I'm not real sure how I'm going to pull that. I've got to, when we got a class, literally go down to Dalton because of a loan credit union down there, and I've got to switch the money around. So that one's not much choice for me. All right, so let's just mention a little bit on Chapter 10, but I'm not going to keep y'all very long today. We'll go ahead and let y'all on out, unless y'all have an objection on that. Chapter 10, let's just mention what it is we're going over. And then if you notice, it's a relatively short chapter. and that they go through and discuss your different applications that you're going to be mainly working with up here on this. We're on the application layer at this point. And that's application layer in terms of TCP, okay? Which means in OSI model, we're on 3 layers covered in 1 chapter, okay? And if you noticed before that we've been taking 1 to 2 chapters per layer. Although it seems like network layer, we did chapter 8, chapter 7, and chapter 6. So network layer we actually had 3 chapters on. So that was the one you had the most information come at you. And remember, there was a lot of information in there, because that's where you learned how to do subnetting, that's where you learned the VLSM, and all of that stuff, okay? And you learned about IP version 4, IP version 6. So on this one, we're looking at the application layer, the presentation layer, and the session layer. So you're looking at those top 3 layers in OSI, or that top 1 layer in TCP, and those correspond together, if you remember from back in chapter 2. So we're going to be looking at those in this chapter. There's not a whole lot on that. We're going to talk about the applications there that you're going to be dealing with. And if you look at the key terms, there's not a whole lot on that list of key terms for the chapter. And I've actually already talked about some of the stuff that's in the chapter to you before. So we really are getting farther on ahead. So we may go ahead and start on the cabling before then, okay? And let y'all have a little more flexibility. And then that y'all can go ahead and get stuff finished on up. Out of those things mentioned right there on the key terms, Boot P, the very first one, that one, I don't know why they still got it in the books, because that's actually an obsolete protocol out there. And it's been obsolete for a bunch of years. I don't know why Cisco keeps putting it in the books. It's been replaced by DHCP. DHCP is a whole lot more dynamic, is a whole lot more robust than Boot P. Boot P merely gave an IP address to a machine. Okay, and that it then got the file set up from there. As they note in the book, it's been superseded by DHCP. DHCP is not something new. DHCP has been around for many years, because it goes back to before 2000. So it's not something that DHCP just appeared in the middle 2010s, okay? It's been around 20 or more years, and I'm really not sure when it was developed before then, but it came out as a development superseding Boot P. But Boot P really got used before 2000. And that really goes back to a degree of when DHCP, and Boot P didn't get used a whole lot. That's the other interesting item. DHCP appeared along with the issue of IP version 4 running out of addresses there in the late 90s, along with IP version 6 being developed, but instead of having to make the big switch to that whole thing, DHCP working with the private addresses was part of the benefit of where we could extend things. Before you did that, you were assigning statically an address to every machine that was a public address. DHCP, first off, with the private addresses and using the, I've gone blank. What protocol is it we're using going through? The NAT, that one just went out of my head for some reason. But using the NAT, where we could use private addresses inside the network with a public address going outside, but just one public address. That initially you went around and put private addresses on all the machines after you had gone from when you put in NAT. But prior to that, you had put in public addresses on every machine. So when I first set up the network at Swainsboro Tech back about 1990, through when I left there in 96, we were using public addresses on every machine in the school. And then after that, they switched a year or two after that to where they went to private addresses and used NAT. Okay? Well, the other part was, so initially you had static. And then you went to switching of, wait a minute, the nice thing about DHCP was you didn't have to have as big of an address pool as you had number of devices, but you just needed to have an address pool of available addresses, and even if you were still using public, it worked for, so some places were, that you didn't have to have as many public addresses in that case as you had machines, because you could use DHCP. You just had to have the number of addresses available as the number of machines that were on at any given point. Okay? Think about in the school here. We don't have all of these computers on being used all day long, right? Or really at any given point. They're not all in use in every room at any given point. Think about in offices out there. It's the same type thing. In a lot of smaller offices, yeah, everybody's in there working at the same time. But you get the larger offices, and what have you got? You got some people work first shift, some work second shift, some work third shift, for instance, okay? They have their own individual machines. So that means during first shift, the third shift machine just sits there not used. You don't need an address for it during that time period. Does that make sense? So with DHCP, you could have a smaller pool of numbers than your number of machines. You just had to have enough for all of the machines to be online at any given point. Okay? Not done a whole lot on that. Generally, you're creating pools to cover everything you've got. And that way it doesn't make any difference. There's always the person that's the first shift employee that can't sleep that night or wants to take tomorrow off to go do something, and so comes in and works late tonight. Or that's on third shift and comes in, needs to come in and work with some first shift employees about whatever it is they're doing, and that they have to work together during the day at some point. So you still get crossover on that. But if y'all picture it, you can see, and in some organizations you actually have shared machines that one person first shift uses it, another person uses it second shift. Or you look at the computer in my office down there that I have to leave it open because it's not my office, that it's technically adjunct office. And so that computer gets theoretically used in some semesters. It does get a little bit more usage, that it gets more usage than just the times I'm there. So they've got to make sure it can get online whenever. So, because like, since I'm here Monday and Wednesday, there could be an adjunct go in there and use it on Tuesday and Thursday or whatever. Does everybody follow on that? So you've got sometimes shared machines, and that's the illustration of, you really do have shared machines out there, even by regular employees. Obviously you got other shared machines that are out there because we can all go down the hall to the library and get on the computers there in the library. Well, y'all can all get on the computers in the library and do work on there. And that it's not a machine sitting there for you. As opposed to these machines, this hour, that machine is yours, but another hour is somebody else's machine. So Boot P was what was originally developed, and it dates back to I think around 1980, but then when you get to the 90s, DHCP was developed and is a whole lot more extensive. Boot P only gave you an IP address. DHCP has all kinds of information that can be assigned to the machine, including the machine's name, its IP address, 4 or 6. There's a version 6 and a version 4 of DHCP. And a number of other settings can all be set on. You can actually set on it also through DHCP. You can tell that machine it only operates at certain hours, etc. But Boot P was real limited. DHCP gave you a whole lot more to go with that. The book only tells you at this point about IP addresses on both of those. But DHCP literally is a whole lot more robust on what it can do. Does that make sense? But Boot P was one that's just not used anymore out there. And again, like I tell you, I'm not real sure why they keep mentioning it in these books and include it specifically there. It's not just a mention in here, notice, it was a key term for the chapter. DHCP is the one you really need to know. But just be aware of Boot P. Okay? The others, we'll talk more extensively about them Wednesday and Monday. About what we can do with each one of those and the different types of things on them. But we're looking at the top 3 layers of OSI: application, presentation, and session. Now, session layer, remember, is where it actually builds the connection between the two machines. And as my instructor told us, the way to think in terms of that one really more is it's the secretary layer. And so we're really going to talk more in terms of presentation and application of OSI in here than session. But the session is where the conversation's set up. Okay? And that think like a secretaries of CEOs of big companies. Okay? That CEOs don't call each other. They tell their secretary to call the other one, and once both secretaries are talking to each other, they then transfer it off to the CEO. Does that make sense? I've never gotten to do that. I guess the closest was when I first started out, when I was at Jonesboro Tech, and we had one phone sitting there for all of the faculty in the school, and that the secretaries and the administrators in the office had phones, and there was only like there's probably 7 people of those total, 3 or 4 administrators and about 2 or 3 secretaries. And if a phone call came in, they answered it, the secretary answered it, buzzed the room to tell me you had a phone call. I had to go down to the office, take the phone call. So she had worked as a receiving secretary for me, but I never had where I can get somebody to place a call for me. And that was, I had to go down the hall. And I was one of the first ones in the school there that actually had my own phone in the office. And that was because whichever computer company we were using at the moment there, and it was Burroughs, which is what I had there first. After several years, they said I had to have a phone by the computer sitting in the classroom, and we had a big mid-range that was probably as long as this thing, but on out another foot or two and this tall, sitting in there. That ran everything in just terminals sitting on your tables. You didn't have smart devices. Sort of to a degree back to where we are now with the VDI devices, where they're just connected down there to the server downstairs. So we're sort of going back to the future. And then Burl said I really needed a phone in there to be able to call them and for the computer to call home occasionally. So they got a phone for me at that point. It was really for the computers, what they all said, but it was a phone I could use. The rest of the faculty still had to go to the front office, and then they put out 2 or 3 phones distributed through the school so they didn't have to go all the way up to the front office. So, and now we've got phones in our offices, and all of us have got a phone we're carrying around on us, or that I've got laying here that I'm talking to today to record us on. And bear in mind, that's got more power than that big computer I was talking about sitting in their head. Okay? All right, any questions for me on that? So that's sort of an overview on 10. It doesn't have a ton more of stuff in here, but to give us something we'll go over on Thursday, that I'm going to stop at this point. Yeah, go.
Allows the addresses to be reused when no longer needed. So is it just constantly cycling through them every time someone uses them?
What happens is, and that's, I'm not sure if y'all are static in here or not. I think we've gone back to static. But what happens is, if you're using DHCP, somebody go to command prompt. And you see, I think they did. But what happens is, when you turn the machine on, it sends a request to the DHCP server. The DHCP server then releases, and that's the actual term for it, an address to that machine. Normally for 8 days. I don't know why it's 8 days and not 7 days, but it's 8 days. Right? If I was setting a rule, I would set it for a week, 7 days. They set 8 days.
DHCP is off.
DHCP is off. Okay. DHCP, well, there it is.
I guess it is off.
Yeah, it is using DHCP. So you are using DHCP. Okay. So when y'all turn these machines on, it goes out, sends a signal, requests an address. The address is leased back to the machine, to your machine. Then that address belongs to that machine for the next 8 days or until the machine's turned on. Now, if it's turned off, the lease expires. Sort of like you rent an apartment.
Like every 8 days, you have a new IP address.
You may. It could, depending on how it's set up. Now, what really usually happens is that instead it renews it. It's just like if you go rent an apartment, you lease it for a year. Well, that means at the end of the year, you're out of the apartment, right? However, if people have rented the apartment to you, want you to stay in there, they'll renew the lease with you for another year. Or in a lot of cases, they actually go on to an automatic roll. Where I've been in the same apartment for 10 years now. I had a lease the first year, but then it's just a rollover month to month, like I said. Okay? So they let me keep on using it month to month. And if they don't want me in there anymore, I don't want to be in there anymore, then we cancel it in a month. For the first year, we both committed, I committed I was going to stay in there for a year, and they committed that it belonged to me. Does that make sense? Yeah. And the same thing's happening on DHCP. Now, DHCP, what actually does happen is, you lease that. address for 8 days. At the end of 4 days, the machine will actually send a request to the DHCP server asking to renew it. That's at 50% of the time. Okay? The DHCP server will normally, at that point, say, okay, we'll renew it and use it, the address for another 8 days from that 4th day. So that means at least 12 days. Okay? If the DHCP server does not respond, the client sends again 50% of the remaining time from there and so on until time runs out. Because you could pull the addresses back in and say that you don't want to extend it on out. Okay? And if you're doing it, and you can set it smaller periods of time. Remember what I said about where we have a smaller pool for people, the fact you know most of your machines are not ever in use at the same time, you may only have an 8-hour lease then. And so you only lease it for 8 hours that people normally work. And they shut the machine off when they leave. And then that means it expires.
It's designed for both small and large networks.
Yes. You'll use it for both. Because you're gonna, actually what happens for y'all at home is your ISP and your, actually your router sitting there, use DHCP to assign an address to your machine. You go into a real large company, they're gonna do the same thing. Makes it much easier to manage. Because you don't have to, if something happens to this machine, and we replace the machine, we don't have to know what the address was on this machine. Put the new machine back in here, it just goes against an address as soon as we put it back in. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. So even the DHCP keeps asking the server to ask for more time so that it expires.
So every 50% of the time of the lease, it asks to renew. If it doesn't get renewed at 50%, 50% of the remaining time it asks again. Okay? And it's sort of like if you lived in an apartment. When you get halfway through the year, if you're planning to stay there, you may well go talk to the owner about, I'm gonna stay here for another year. I'd like 6 months I've been here, if you rented it for a year. I'd like 6 months I've been here and I'd like to stay on. And you may well sign another contract. Or think about a baseball player with their contracts playing baseball or whatever sport, that they sign a contract for 4 or 5 years or whatever, or for a couple of years. Before that contract runs out, the owner and the player, or their agents, start talking to each other about extending it. And for them to stay on if the owner and the player both want to continue playing together. Does that make sense? They don't wait till the contract runs out, because like where you saw last week signed a 5-year extension or whatever to his contract there with Atlanta. He was good through 2023 or something. Now he's, that they agreed to go on to 2028. So he's not run the time out, but rather than wait till the very end, but you also have the problem of Craig Kimball has no contract yet and is playing for nobody this year after his contract ran out last year. And he thought for sure he would be signed real quickly for real big money last fall by somebody when the Red Sox didn't renew him and said they didn't want him back. And so far he's not signed with anybody yet. So that works the same approach way on, okay? Now really expecting the case of him, June the 1st, you're gonna see somebody sign, because there's an additional bit on that, because the Red Sox did make him an offer last fall. If he signs with anybody before June the 1st, that team has to give a draft pick to Boston for having gotten their player. If he signs after June the 1st, Boston gets nothing. So, where they've talked about Atlanta may want him back to play again, I would suspect they're gonna wait till June 1st at this point, and they may well sign them back at that point. But if they wait till then, it doesn't cost them anything other than his salary. If they sign him before then, they gotta compensate Boston. Which means it costs them more money. Actually, it costs them a future player. But that's how DHCP is gonna work, just like if you go rent a car or whatever, okay? Because you rent a car, you may decide you want to keep it a little bit longer and keep renting it a little bit longer, so you renew the lease, right? And sometimes, wherever you're renting it from, whatever you're renting, they don't want to rent it to you any longer. You see businesses occasionally run into that one, where they're renting this spot where their business is, and then whoever owns it decides they want to do something different with that store or put a different building up there. You'll see the business say they've lost their lease and they have to move to someplace else. And they'll have a lost lease, sale, etc., because they got to move everything to another location. And that happens. And then you discover they tear the building down and build this new fancy thing, or the owner found somebody else that wanted to pay a whole lot more money rent for the location. Whatever. All right, any other questions? Did I answer it for you, Philip?
I was just wanting to know for like a cycle.
So think of DHCP as, it really is, lease really is the term on it. It really does lease addresses. So that's the right technical term, okay? Even though my examples are leasing, renting, lease is what they literally are doing technically. That's the technical term that they do, okay? As opposed to if you weren't using DHCP, you were statically assigning address, that address belongs to that individual machine. And so if his machine fails, if we're using static addressing, his machine fails and we put another machine in there to replace that machine, we got to figure out what the address was for the machine that we're replacing, so that we get the same address on it now, so that we don't go and goof up and put the same address on two machines.
Be a good idea to have that stuff written down.
So you've got to have it written down, but in a lot of cases it's not. And then the other problem is people will learn a little bit. They'll find out about addresses and about how you can go in and change the address just by going to the network settings. And people will go in and change the address in there. And then it goofs up everything. And so then you got to find it, go fix it. And even if you're in DHCP, it could well be that still, because they can find out about it, or somebody out there, a worker or whatever, and go, ooh, it'd work better if I put in this address. Well, then you got to find it when you see it popping up on your management stuff, that here's your problem addresses, and you can find it from there, but there's some work to do that. And then to go set it back to what it was and know what it was supposed to be. If you're using DHCP and they've put an address in there, because you can change these to static in here. Actually, I think they got the settings set where you can't, but most time you can. All we'd have to do is go to it if we were using DHCP, is find the rogue machine. Just go in there and tell it, go back to automatic, and everything's happy again. If it's static, we got to know what address do we give it back. And that was, when I was running the network at Swainsboro Tech, that was an aggravation for me at times. Or the machine would start acting up, and so it would wipe out the address as it was acting up, and I'd go fix whatever was wrong, and then I had to figure out what the address was again. Which I did typically have written on them, but, or I had it written down somewhere, but I had to figure that out still. So it was an extra little piece. Any other questions? All right, let's stop for the day. I'm going to turn off the recorder.